for those who are watching the recording, this is Ryan. I'm subbing for Damien. So let's take 2 seconds. Let's kind of change our brain around the stuff that we are doing right now. See if we can kind of dive into stuff, maybe some psychology, you know, get a little artsy-fartsy about stuff. And I'm looking through the work on this. I should look through the work here, so it's all. What is creature design to you guys? While I'm looking. What's creature design to you specifically? This is going to be an interactive session, by the way. I ask a lot of questions, so get your typing fingers ready. And a word of advice, if you're going to answer something, just type up something really quick first, and you can expand it later. But this is a serious question. And if you're watching this in offline, if you've downloaded this, what is creature design for you? I ask it. It's not a small question. So I understand if it takes a second. But it's kind of an important question, both for the skills you learn and also for some context. Where can you put these skills? And it's really neat because we get to learn all kinds of cool things. Like if you follow a guy like Neville Page and his career, the stuff that Neville Page has done and the stuff that they do on Face Off. You know, there's this amazing life for your designs. So the question is, what is creature design for you? Okay, got some questions here. Marcos, creating unexisting animals based and inspired from nature, or at least for me. Simon, I guess creating interesting and believable creatures. I like the feeling of creating something that could be real. And then Christian, making up things that don't exist yet would be, don't exist yet would be the fundamental part. Now, I found a really good definition for creature design from Carlos Fuentes. And basically, it's creature design is the combination of animals and humans. And that's it. And the interesting thing about that is basically creature design becomes like anything that's not human. Anything that's not human is basically creature design. You know, a teddy bear is a creature. And depending on your experience with teddy bears, you know, it's a good creature or a bad creature, right? They have character design, and that's characters. And characters are what? What are characters? Characters versus creatures. This is a really important point because it's going to open up potential here. What's character versus creature in your definition? Christian says characters you can intelligently interact with. It's possible. Makes creatures evil, right? But is that necessarily true? Simon, character I guess would be more linked to something being more conscious and self-aware. Character would be. Well, a creature can be a character, Christian says, which is very true. Let's say if we were to say character design is basically humans. Because there's a huge part, and there's a lot of skill set that goes into character design. There's a big skill set that goes into that. And it's not necessarily the same as creature design, not necessarily. So character design, largely human. Creature design is a combination of animal and human, which means everything except human, right? Because, of course, a creature can be a character if you looked at it in terms of intelligence and things like that. But if we have this simple definition, there's an enormous amount of stuff that's kind of open for us. And that's one of the cool things I think about what Damien's doing here is he's kind of put it in these real simple areas for you. So mid-sized enemy beast, a behemoth, and then you're doing a boss, a game boss. So you've got very specific stuff that you're sculpting. But remember, you know, it's animal and human. And this is coming from Carlos Fuentes. So if you look at some of his creature designs, he's got some pretty crazy stuff out there. Who knows Carlos Fuentes' work? Yeah, it's one of the gold standards. Just an amazing artist. That's Anthropos. There we go. So how's the sculpting process going for you guys? Is it a fun process? Are you able to kind of get your vision across? Where are some of the pain points that you guys are experiencing? What's missing from your sculpts? Simon says mine can be warbly and lack form. Anybody else having that problem? Need to study more, sometimes to reach a point which I don't understand anatomy. Could improve on structures and texture. And Marcos, what do you need to study more? Okay, I think that's finished downloading. Come on, where'd it go? Okay, I'm going to import something right now. Simon needs to better understand animal anatomy. Animal anatomy like quadrupeds. Yeah. Okay. So let me start screen drawing program. So what do we need to learn? So I've just looked a little bit at what you guys have kind of talked about. And now I want to kind of give you a couple of things to kind of think about in terms of what to learn and where you can kind of go from here. And Simon, yeah, I think I'll look at your model here in a second, see if I can kind of get back. So creature design is human plus animal. I had a class the other day. I was creating some kind of crazy creature, and somebody asked me, well, why don't you create something totally new, some totally different anatomy and things like that? And one of the reasons why we have to include human in this animal is so that there's a point of reference. So there's some kind of connection for us, right? So that it kind of connects. I think Damien was showing earlier that some creature designers will actually use genitalia inside of a design to really kind of freak us out on a subconscious level. So it's really kind of interesting to be able to kind of pick different parts of animals, things of that nature. But if we were to abstract all of this all the way back, not to, like, let's say using somebody's specific anatomy, spider versus this versus that, there's a couple of principles that we can use just from this animal anatomy side of things. And I think maybe that's where I can be most productive with you guys right now. Human plus animal. There's a ton of human anatomy out there. There's a lot of different things, and I'm going to get a couple of words from you guys right now, but how you apply this stuff to animals is something that's a little bit kind of lost. You get books like Elliot Goldfinger's, you get books like, there's some older books, I've forgotten their names, but I've got a ton of older books that just show the anatomy, and then some people will say that animal anatomy is really just the same as human anatomy. It's just kind of in a different place. And while that's useful, it's not accurate. Animal anatomy is different just because it connects from one part to another part, because it connects to different parts. For example, which animals don't have clavicles? Think about it. Which animals do not have clavicles? Do horses have clavicles? Cows, as Christian's saying? Do dogs have clavicles? Cats? Birds? Some of those do, some of those don't. But what happens when an animal does not have a clavicle? Like, how does that even work? Is there actually some structure there instead? What is the function of that anatomy? So we know, the sternocleidomastoid. So we're going to have our head here, and then we're going to have the rib cage flowing down, and we'll have the sternocleidomastoid coming from the back up to the side, right? You get this sternocleidomastoid, and it's connecting from the mastoid process, going down to the clavicle, the sternum, basically. And we call it the sternocleidomastoid. What happens because there's no clavicle for it to connect to, or no sternum per se for it to connect to? What does this thing do? There's like a little tendinous area there that becomes really relevant. And so these little differences, like do they have clavicles or not have clavicles, these are actually design points that you can take from anatomy, and they will help you understand certain things and create specific feelings in your character. So for example, if you're creating a werewolf, now we have the question, in a werewolf, and let's just see what Google has to tell us. Do dogs have clavicles? My typing skills, not so much. Dogs don't have obvious collarbones that we have. What do they have instead? If it's not an obvious collarbone, what else would they have that would kind of fit that structure? Notice, if this is accurate, how you're seeing something attach or originate from the mastoid process behind the ear, and it comes down and it's connecting to the humerus. Or it's coming to the scapula. You might think that this is a small distinction, but let's say we're going to design a werewolf. Let's just Google werewolf. Look at some designs. Now there's the standard design aesthetic, which you would want to know about because you're going to sometimes use the standard design aesthetic. And so in the standard design aesthetic, they have clavicles. Look at that. They have full shoulders, really strong deltoids, really bulky, right? Huge 7th cervical vertebrae. But then you start to get into kind of different designs. more powerful designs that start to kind of tweak away from a standard conception. And this is important because now suddenly you're put into a different perspective. Now you are designing something that's yours, something that's coming from your knowledge, and you're trying to say something slightly different. What about this werewolf? Does he have the same clavicular structure that a human has? Or what about the scapula in the back? Does he have the same scapula structure? Because in a human, the scapula is largely just this thing that's in the back, and then the humerus would be right here. But in a dog, they have a different rib cage, right? What's the difference between a human rib cage and a dog rib cage? Shout it out. Let me know. What do you guys think? And if anybody wants to be unmuted, go for it. Let me know. Just raise your hand. What's the difference between a dog and a human rib cage? Tilted 90 degrees. Kind of humans go sideways. Theirs goes more vertical. Right. It has a different, how do I say it? Forces are working on it differently. Because instead of standing upright, like this, the dog is on all fours. And so gravity is pulling it in a different way. In our case, gravity pulls down this way, so we get these kind of like sagging rib cage like this. But in a dog, you get it sagging downwards, and in a horse, and in a wolf, and in any quadruped, the behavior is going to be slightly different. And so in this case, if you were to take a cross-section, it looks like that. But if you take a cross-section here, it's going to look totally different. So now when you're working on a werewolf design, for example, or some kind of creature, could be a werewolf boss kind of design, such a simple thing as a rib cage becomes this new little design element for you. Do you make your boss character with this really broad shoulders and more like a human, or do you start to make him more like a creature, combining more of this animal quality and starting to push that around? And what happens if a human's rib cage was to literally transform and start to kind of push out from the front and collapse in from the side? Would that be painful? What kind of experience would that be? That would be insane, right? To have your bones literally morphing, and then that's actually the werewolf experience. And so, of course, their clavicles do different things. Their clavicles, instead of being kind of straight up and down, little thin wedges, they become this large thing that stretches out with gravity, and because it has to be the insertion origin, and it has to be this large anchor point because the clavicle is not there to capture a lot of that weight. So now you've got another design element. You've got a rib cage and you've got a scapula. And these are two things that you can use to start to transform things. Little tiny anatomical stuff. Very, very, very basic. But incredibly powerful, especially when you're thinking about creature designing on a high, high level. On a high level, it's about little things like this, not texture, not wrinkles. It's about what's the rib cage like, what's the pelvis like. So, for example, what's the difference between a human pelvis and an animal pelvis?